welcome students to this new course on environmental economics. This course is divided into 12 modules and will cover 30 hours. This course has focus on 3 key aspects. First is theory, second is application of these theories, and third is regulation and policies. So, major component of this course is related to theory, and this course has 12 modules. First module is introductory and covers meaning, rationale, evolution of environmental economics, basic concepts and tools which we will use very frequently in the coming discussions are also discussed in these modules, and we will also compare the environmental economics with other subdisciplines of economics which are very close to environmental economics like ecology and natural resource economics. Second modules deals with the different types of public and private goods and environmental goods. Actually, environmental goods are mostly non-rival and non-excludable goods. So, we will discuss in detail what are these different kinds of goods and services related to environment. Then problem of collective actions like tragedy of commons, present dilemma, games, Olson logic of collective actions will also be discussed in the second module. Third modules will discuss the nexus between environment, poverty and economic growth. It will also discuss the environmental Kuznets curve, and it is a very famous curve which clearly shows the inverted U shape relationship between economic development and environmental protection. Initially, when the economic growth increases, environmental protection declines or environmental degradation decline, but after a particular level of economic development, then environmental condition improves. So, this relationship will be discussed in detail in module 3rd. Then module 4 will discuss the concept of environmental sustainability, ecological footprints and environmental performance index. Fifth module is devoted to the basic concept, values, environmental values, valuation, welfare effect of price change. So, in this module we will study the different kinds of environmental values like option values, bequest values, non-use values and use values of environment. So, environment provide us different kinds of values, and these values will be discussed in detail in this volume. Then next volume modules will be discussing about the cost benefit analysis and non-market valuation, revealed preference methods. So, in this topic we will study about the social cost and benefit analysis. When we have an environmental development project, it has certain cost associated which may be spread over a longer period in future also, and similarly the benefits of the projects also spread over a longer period. So, in this unit we will discuss the cost benefit analysis in detail, and we will also examine the non-market valuation by using the revealed preference method. Next module is devoted to non-market valuation, and in this module we will use the stated preference method to estimate the value of environment. So, environmental valuation will be estimated by using the stated preference method, and within the stated preference methods we have a contingent valuation method which is very frequently used by the researcher to estimate the value of environment. Then next volume is related to market efficiency, optimality, consumer and producer surplus, and in this unit you will study how to achieve the efficiency and productivity of different kinds of resources. Pareto optimality concept will also be introduced, and we will also try to understand what is the consumer surplus and producer surplus, and how to estimate these kind of surpluses will also be discussed. Then next module will be on optimum provision of public goods and public bads. So, public goods and public bads both are being received by us, and when we produce certain kinds of goods and services, we also generate bad products. So, up to what extent these bad products can be generated into the economy will also be discussed using appropriate techniques to know the optimum level of both public goods and bad products. Next unit is related to externality and market failures. In fact, market failure is one of the main issues related to environmental economics, because most of the environmental products are non-rival and non-excludable. So, market fails to deliver these products. So, either market provide these goods and services less efficiently, or there is no existence of market in case of these kind of goods. So, externality and market failure, and then how to deal with these kind of failures. Can taxes be imposed to address the issue of externality? All these aspects will be discussed in this unit. Then another important topic which we will discuss in this course is Coase theorem, and Coase theorem is related to property rights, and one of the main reasons for the market failures in case of environmental product is lack of property rights. So, how to ensure proper property rights, and the Coase theorem which clearly states that if property rights are well defined, whosoever is receiving the right, it hardly matter, but efficient solution will occur if these rights are traded in the market. So, Coase theorem will also be discussed, and then in the last unit, and that is also a very important unit, we will discuss about environmental regulations. So, there are different kinds of approaches of regulations, and these approaches can be clubbed into two main groups. One is command and control approach, and other is market based approach. So, we will discuss in detail these two approaches of environmental regulations, and we will discuss the policy issues related to protection of environment, which policy will be more effective to protect the environment, whether command and control will be more effective or market based approach will be more effective. All these aspects will be discussed. So, after just giving a brief idea about this course, let me now take the first unit, and that first unit is introductory in nature, and in this unit you will study about what is environmental economics, why should we study the environmental economics, and what is positive environmental economics and what is normative environmental economics, and you will also study about the evolution of environmental economics, how the subject evolved over a period of time. So, let me first discuss what is environmental economics. But before knowing the environmental economics, one must know what is economics, and economics studies the allocation of scarce resources among various alternatives, and since our resources are limited and these limited resources have alternative uses, so the problem of choice occurs, and sometimes economics is called a science of making choice. And why we need to make choice? Because whether we have a physical resources, whether we have a human resources or financial resources, these resources are having limited availability, and due to limited availability of these resources, but these resources can be put in various uses. For instance, if we want to spend say 2000 crores of rupees to clean the river Ganga, the same resources cannot be used to set up new hospitals, new IITs, etc. So, therefore, resources are limited, and therefore, these limited resources need to be optimally utilized. So, in economics we deals with how the resources are used and how to make choice between the alternatives. So, taking this subject economics, environmental economics is actually a sub-discipline of economics, and it is a new branch of economics, and it is the application of tools of economics to analyze the environmental resources, and we also identify certain kinds of issues which can be dealt with the use of economic tools and techniques. And its focus is on how and why people make decisions that have consequences for natural environment, and how economic institutions and policies can help in ensuring the balance between human desires and ecosystem. There should be a proper balance between the human needs and the environmental needs. So, ecosystem services are also studied in environmental economics, and when we put more pressure on our ecosystems, then these services degrades, and therefore, there is a trade off between various kinds of environmental goods and conventional goods, and in environmental economics we also deals with certain kind of trade offs. If we are focusing more on creating the conventional goods, then less resources will be available for protecting the environment. So, there is a trade off, and this trade off is also examined in environmental economics, and we also study in environmental economics the impact of economy on environment. So, when economic growth increases, when employment growth increases, when overall economy is increasing, how this increase in economy is having some impact on environment. For instance, if our GDP growth rate is increasing, that will put more pressure on fossil fuels, because demand for energy will increase, and when demand for energy is increasing, then the demand for fossil fuels will increase, and it will generate more pollution in the economy. So, bad products in the economy will also increase, and that will put more pressure on the carrying capacity of environment. So, in environmental economics we also study the significance of environment to the economy, and sometimes it is called that environment development is must, but environment is first. So, we have to study the relationship between environment and development in environmental economics. For instance, we need the development activities, we need our development, but development also lead to environmental degradation. So, therefore, my view is that environment is first, although development may be must. So, taking these two things into account, in environmental economics we deals with how to make a proper balance between environmental needs and the human needs for various conventional goods and services. Environmental economics also deals with how to regulate the different kinds of economic activities. The objective here is to achieve the balance among environmental, economic and other social goals. Let me now discuss why should we study environmental economics, or what is the rationale of studying environmental economics. And to know this, we should know the relationship between environment and economy, and environment provide us various kinds of goods and services, and when we give more emphasis on economic activities, then these services also have some pressure and these services also degraded. So, why environmental problem exist and what are the best solution for these problems must be examined, and for that environmental economics should be studied. What are the institutional and economic causes of environmental problem? We can understand this by understanding the subject. How can we assess the economic values of environmental degradation or improvements? That can be examined by having understanding of the environmental economics. So, environmental economics must be studied to know all these aspects. What economic incentives or instruments can bring improvement in the quality of environmental resources or natural environment, that is also necessary, and for that we must understand the environmental economics. Environmental economics determines the most reasonable trade-off among various set of environmental goods. We will discuss this trade-off in detail later on. So, there are lot of trade-off between various kinds of goods and services, and environmental economics study these kinds of trade-off. Environmental economics also provide the solution for environmental problem through application of market-based models. So, as I in the beginning told you that we have the two kinds of approaches to deal with the environmental issue. One is command and control kind of approach, where we have certain kind of regulation like State Pollution Control Board regulate the environment through appropriate policy actions. Similarly, we have the market based approach that can be used to solve the environmental problems. So, how to use the different kinds of approaches to solve the environmental issues are also examined in environmental economics. Environmental economics also provide solid foundation for most of the policy measures to address the environmental problems. For example, should emission be stopped by regulating or through taxes are also studied, and it also compares the expected social cost and benefit of the policy measures. So, we have different kinds of policy measures, and we can examine these policy measures in terms of how much the social cost they are having and how much the benefit the society are achieving by taking these kind of actions. It accommodates the supply constraints on environmental goods, the aspect ignored by traditional economics to provide the solution for sustainable use. Environmental economics also evaluate the scarcity value of environmental goods for cost benefit analysis of environmental management project. In brief, I can say that the study of environmental economics is needed to understand number one, optimization of pollution and environmental degradation. We know some pollution is inevitable. If we want to achieve zero pollution, then we have to stop various kinds of activities. So, pollution is the byproduct of good product. When we are producing good product, bad product will also be generated. So, the issue here is how to optimize pollution. So, optimization of pollution is studied in environmental economics, and for that efficiency, productivity, all these aspects will be discussed in detail. Second is human needs or greeds. So, we must be knowing the clear cut difference between human needs and greeds. As Gandhiji rightly mentioned that nature can provide or fulfill the needs of everybody, but cannot fulfill the greeds of anybody. So, we should also understand what are our needs and what are our greeds in context of environmental economics. And third important aspect, why should we study environmental economics, is intergenerational equity. If we are plundering our resources today, then these resources would not be available for the future generation. So, we have to establish equity between the current generation and the future generation, and for that basic understanding of environmental economics is very necessary. Then another important issue is problem of scarcity. In the very beginning I told you that the resources at our disposal are scarce. So, scarcity of resources also is an important issue, and these scarce resources have competing use. So, therefore, we have to know how to use optimally these limited resources. trade off we already discussed. So, environmental economics deals with the different kinds of trade off. There is a trade off between conventional goods and environmental goods. If we are, for example, using more water from the river for irrigation purpose, less water will be available for maintaining the ecological flow in the river. So, there is a trade off between these two kinds of products, environmental products or services and conventional goods and services. And another important aspect which you will study in environmental economics is environmental demand, and this is the major contribution of environmental economics. So, how to drive the environmental goods demand, and you know that environmental goods are non-rival, non-excludable, and they are outside the market. So, can we develop a market demand, or can we develop a demand for environmental goods? Those goods which are outside the market is a major challenge, and environmental economics deals with such kind of challenges. So, how to develop a demand for environmental goods which cannot be traded in the market because of nature of these products. Then policy response to solve the environmental problem. So, we should also study environmental economics to know how the different kinds of policies can have the impact on different indicators of environmental protections. And finally, you can also study environmental economics to understand the social cost and benefits of various development projects. When we start any development project, their benefits may be received by one section of society, cost may be borne by another section of society, sometimes cost may be borne by the future by the current generation, benefits may go to the future generation. So, therefore, social cost and benefit analysis of these kind of various development projects can be examined in environmental economics. So, therefore, environmental economics is very useful subject to know the interface between economy and environment. Now, let me tell you that environmental economics can be classified into two branches. One is positive environmental economics and other is the normative environmental economics. In economics also we study these two branches of economics. One is positive environmental economics. Positive environmental economics deals with what is, and most of the physical sciences, I can say all physical sciences are positive sciences, where we study what is, we explore the fact, we interpret the fact, that is all, we do not add anything from our side. So, one part of the environmental economics is positive economics, where we study what is. For example, why our rivers are polluted, why is our environment polluted. So, to get the answer of such kind of questions, you have to study environmental positive economics, and the environmental positive economics is predictive in nature, while another branch of environmental economics is normative economics, and normative economics deals with what ought to be or what should be, and that is prescriptive in nature. So, and both side of economics, both branches of economics are very useful, because welfare part of the environmental economics deals with the normative economics, while positive economics includes all theories etc., like how to optimize pollution, that is the part of positive environmental economics, and how to formulate or what kind of different policies should we formulate to improve the welfare of society, how to improve the environmental conditions through appropriate policy. So, this part is largely comes from normative economics. So, these are the two important branches of environmental economics, positive economics and normative economics. Then we also this normative economics also addresses the problem of market failure in environmental goods. Market failure is one of the major issues in environmental economics. Sometimes market does not exist, sometimes market fails to deliver the goods efficiently, and therefore, what kind of government intervention is required to correct the market failure, or what kind of policies are required to create the enabling environment under which market can work in case of environmental goods. Then next point is how this subject is evolved over a period of time. Evolution of environmental economics. We can cite some of the works of earlier economists, classical economists. Even Ricardo gave the theory of rent, and that rent theory also gives some insight that agriculture is subject to diminishing marginal return, because when we exploit more and more our soil, then productivity of soil declines. So, these earlier classical economists, although have not made explicit mention of environmental issues, but their theories provide the basis for the contemporary environmental debate. Another important topic which or theory is developed by the new classical economist, and that is the marginal principle. So, marginal principle is developed by the classical neoclassical economist Marshall, etc., and this new classical concept of marginalism is very useful to study the optimum use of resources, or we can know how to achieve the equilibrium by taking these concept of marginal cost and marginal revenue, or marginal benefit or marginal cost, etc. Then later on Keynesian economists emphasize on the government intervention and deficit financing. So, the role of the government is strongly advocated by Keynes. You know that Keynes wrote a famous book, General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, in 1936, and he gave the concept of effective demand, and in order to maintain the effective demand, he strongly advocated the role of government. So, role of government means that government has to prepare certain kind of policies to deal with the different kinds of issues. So, policy intervention in economy is also very important topic, and now environmental regulations or environmental policies, they are being used to deal with certain kind of environmental issues. But up to 1950s, environmental economics was not a prominent subject. It got prominence especially after 1970, especially you can say when industrialization generated lot of pollution, then economists, social scientists, biologists, they started thinking about the adverse consequences of economic development on environment, and they start writing on various environmental issues, and especially energy crisis that started in 1973. So, post energy crisis, this subject become more and more relevant, and since 1970s a number of world view have crystallized within the environmentalists, providing a rationale for emergence of environmental economics as a sub-discipline of economics. And in this case, there are three world views regarding the evolution of environmental economics. First is a market and technology driven growth process. Many economists like Julian Simon, they strongly advocate that the technology and economic growth can lead to environmental protection, and they have given their own arguments. For example, if prices of petrol increases in the market, then the cost of production will go up. So then the company will think of developing the alternatives, and they spend lot of money on R&D, research and development, and new form of energy may be evolved, like today this solar energy. Solar energy is continuously becoming more and more cheaper than even another sources of energy, and that is the result of research and development. So, technology and market driven growth process may lead to environmental protection. This is one group. Second group is those who always strongly advocate limit the growth, that the growth in the world economy is creating environmental degradation, and they believe in limiting the growth. They are called eco preservationist. And third is, which is having middle path, they always believe in sustainable development. So, self sustaining development or sustainable development, and this concept came into existence in 1987 in our common future, and most of the economists are now strongly believing that we should focus on achieving the sustainable development, the development that meets the need of the current generation without adversely affecting the needs of future generation. Major landmark in the development of environmental economics, number one is 1961, WWF was created. Then in 1968, UNESCO Biosphere Conference was held. In 1970, Earth Day was celebrated, and now every year on April 21st, Earth Day is celebrated. Then in 1972, the Stockholm Conference on Human Environment created a formal international awareness of the needs for maintaining the quality and integrity of environment. Then in the same year in 1972, the Limit to Growth, the Club of Rome, a group of leaders and thinkers from 40 countries issues this report written by Donella and Mida. So, this is also the important landmark towards the development of environmental economics. Then in 1992, World Bank first time in its World Development Report focuses the relationship between economic development and environment. So, the focus of this report was on the relationship between economic development and environment. In the same year 1992, Agenda 21 of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, that is also called Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, was also held. Same year, Convention on Biological Diversity also highlighted the need for biodiversity conservation. In 1997, Kyoto Protocol, now you all know this is a famous protocol, and it develops a new mechanism for protecting the environment. So, now carbon credit and clean development mechanism. So, different kinds of mechanisms were developed after the Kyoto Protocol. Then in 2002, another Earth Summit was held in Johannesburg, and it also focuses on protecting the environment and raising the various concerns, including the global warming, climate change, and how to achieve the sustainable development. In 2009, Copenhagen Conference on Climate Change was held, and 2010 Aichi biodiversity target were set up for the next one decade, starting from 2011 to 2020, and finally you can say 2015 is the Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the United Nations member countries, and the target is to achieve this goal by 2030. And in 2015 Paris Agreement, an agreement which within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which deals with greenhouse gases emission, mitigation, adoption, were also signed. So, these are the major landmark towards the development of environmental economics. Let me take couple of minutes to summarize what I had discussed in this lecture. In this lecture, I had discussed what is environmental economics, what is economics, and I also discuss the rationale for environmental economics. Why should we study environmental economics? There are trade-off between environmental economics and conventional goods. We have to also maintain intergenerational equity, and for that you must study the environmental economics. And finally, I also discuss the evolution of environmental economics. Thank you very much.